Yeah, there we go. Yeah, so I shifted my camera down so we're a little bit closer to eye, so that way it doesn't feel like you're all looking at the top of my head when I talk. I'm playing a little bit today with some of those page transitions that we kind of left off on, and I'll be trying to use some SVG text to kind of replace the upper left-hand logo text. So let's just give that a shot. I might be my one viewer right now. It's kind of interesting since I've embedded that little widget in the right-hand corner of my site. I think it inflates my viewer count every time the stream actually refreshes. So hopefully Twitch doesn't get mad at that. I'm live programming. Oh, hey PopLogix, how you doing? Alright, so let's see here. So it's yelling at me because I think I was playing with that logo text, but I didn't finish that line of code. So we're going to import the component that we've kind of relegated that to. So components, it's logo text, view. So there we go. So we should be pulling that in now, and we just need to update this here so that way we have access to it as a custom element. Let's refresh this. There we go. Yeah, go ahead and ask. And that's really what this is about. It's kind of a lunch and learn where I just kind of make sure I dedicate an hour of programming whatever I want for myself at the beginning of lunch. And so, yeah, ask anything. CDD logo text. So you see that SVG being shoved in there, so we need to actually clean that up so it's a little bit nicer. But you can see we're using kind of a custom font there. So that's partially because we have this SVG view box blowing things up. So SVGs are weird in that you can specify like a view box and you can specify a width and a height, and one scales, whereas one kind of defines a region and can clip it. So let's clean this. So what happens if we make this 200? So it just shrinks, but I think we keep the same aspect ratio. Yeah. Oh, hey, Paula Bean, if I'm saying that correctly. How are you doing? And again, PopLogix, feel free to ask any questions that you have. Let me remove this real quick so I can just show you that we did end up completing that tiny little bit where we have our page corrections. So here we have this About Us transition where everything fades and then it kind of goes back. So that's kind of what we were having trouble with last time, and it had to do with having like an auto height. It's really hard to do a CSS transition from a value that is auto to a static pixel value or even a percentage. So we ended up just using static values for both. Given that this content isn't dynamic, we always know what it is, at least at this breakpoint. We might change it a little bit when we move to kind of a mobile resolution, and then this section becomes kind of like a viewport height for its unit. But for at least right now, we can use those statics, and we can use that to kind of key that transition off of. And you'll see that there's kind of like a transition delay. So we start the fade, we let it run for about 1.5 seconds, or 0.15 seconds actually. And then after that's kind of kicked off, ideally you don't want to kick off too many transitions at once. It can make the browser lag a little bit. So we stagger it slightly, and while it's staggered, we then kind of translate that height. So we do a view transition, fade out, and then we have that translation on height on that containing element. And so right now we're replacing, we had coffee driven dev as text right here. We're kind of on npm. All right, I'm reading your question. Is it possible to serve a project in npm on another workstation, even though you might have npm installed, but it wasn't the original source of all the directives and frameworks that exist in the project? Are you talking about the ability when you have like a package.json to just type npm install and it restore the packages? So ideally, when you create sort of, yeah. So when you save a project, and we can pull up the GitHub repository for this one. The idea is that you don't have to check in all of the dependencies themselves because it could really bloat the size. So if we go to Coffee Driven Dev, and we have project ideas as a repo, and we have this website that we're currently working on that we commit to at the end of each feed. So if you actually go to coffeedrivendev.com, you'll kind of see this little thing here, but you'll see that we don't actually check in our node modules. They're all kind of tracked for us in the package.json. And so here are all of our development dependencies. So those aren't actually deployed as part of the website, but they're used to help build, compile, serve while you're developing. And then we have our normal dependencies, which are actually incorporated in the source code upon deployment. So what happens is when you pull in this project, assuming you have node installed, you have npm installed, if you're in the root directory for it, you can just run the command npm install or just yarn install, and either one of those will generate a package. It will generate like a lock file, and it will restore all those files into a folder called node modules, and then it's then able to use those for whatever you want. But the whole thought process is that you shouldn't have to check in or save to source control things that are just dependencies that you don't directly change yourselves other than the version number, because it could drastically bloat, I guess, what you are saving. So it makes it easier to pass this around too, right? So if I have 1,000 dependencies, someone doesn't have to do that initial download just to kind of sync this. And if you saw any changes checked into source control for them, they wouldn't necessarily be tied to your specific app. So it might be confusing whether or not those changes did or did not actually impact your app. But so we can do that here, right? If you want a more visual example. So let me close this. So there's our project. Let's open up the folder that it's in. Actually, I can just do it here on the left. So you can see that I have node modules. I'm just going to literally delete all of those node modules. Goodbye. It might take a hot second. Again, there are usually thousands of files and at least hundreds of folders in there. It's thinking about it. And so you see that while it's doing that, I don't think it's going to let me do this. Run serve. It's probably going to throw me some kind of error. Delete permanently. Yeah, so it's giving me an error because it can't find a module because we've deleted it out of that node modules folder. Let's reveal and explore. It might be easier to delete from there. Oh, okay, it's gone. Okay, so now you see that all of those node modules are gone, but this is very similar to the situation we'd be in if we pulled down this source from GitHub and cloned it locally. If we wanted to restore them all, it's just yarn install or npm install. And it uses that packages.json file and those listed dependencies and dev dependencies to go out and find those in the npm registry and pull them down in a consistent way, put them into that node modules folder, and then when you run any of your commands, it'll just reference those. So usually if you pull something down and you're getting an issue, like it's saying it can't find modules, a lot of times you just need to restore the packages for that solution. I hope that answers your question. It's kind of weird because if you follow tutorials or anything for a lot of the projects that are out there, they just kind of assume that you have a working knowledge of packages, how to restore them, how to install them. But I feel like if you're just starting with projects like this, it can be a little daunting because there is a lot of that assumed knowledge. And then for anyone watching, if you do hop over onto our GitHub repositories, we have a little project ideas one, and feel free to create issues in this repository and suggest things you'd like to see me work on. So I already have one for after we complete like our initial website. I'm thinking we might do like an HTML5 canvas game that's powered by the Twitch channel chat, where you can kind of control your player by sending specific commands. and we'll use C# WebSockets to kind of update their position on that canvas. So it could be a nice way to kind of engage with all of you, and then also we can live code and add new features to that game. But if there's anything in particular you want to see, or if there's anything you have questions about, you can kind of create issues in this repository, like a continuous, like ask me anything, or just kind of giving me ideas of things you'd like to see live coded. So you'll see that npm install is still taking a while. And the biggest thing there is Cypress. So we're streaming right now. And Cypress is a pretty large file. So pulling it down can be a bit of a pain. So I'll do some coding blind for a little bit here. These won't auto-update for a hot second. And hopefully Cypress will just finish in the background while we're doing this. I could probably remove it as a dependency, at least temporarily, to get a faster install, just because it's only really used for end-to-end testing, which we don't currently do. Also, let's see here. You're leaving me hanging, Pop Logics. What's up? So we're going to pull in that logo text, and then I'm just going to do an SVG refresher to try to remind myself the best way to position this stuff. SVG update position top left. So you could just change the view box. I think I'm just going to open Figma and do it, and then I'll export a new SVG for us to use. They don't have to have the same version of npm, so long as I think you're using npm 8 or greater, they're able to use that package.lock and be deterministic. But you also have the ability to specify in your package.json. Where is it at? That's not specified here. So package JSON specify node version. So in your package.json, you can, I think it's the engines, yeah, use engines, and you can specify what node version is required. So it has to be that node version or higher for you to be able to ultimately do any of the commands there, else it'll kind of throw an error. So that's a quick way to say, hey, I want you to be using at least npm version X if you're going to be using my project, to kind of force them to upgrade. And I think now you can run any npm command if you're using one of the newer version ones by saying npm at the version you want to run and then your command. So that'd be like npm install, but you could basically it looks like Twitch is going to yell at me. Let's see if I can do it with. So you can't see it there in chat, but it could be like npm at 8 install, so you can specify the version of npm you want to use when running a command. If you have multiple versions, you're kind of tied to. All right, Paula Bean. You're investigating a user interface where a tab bar is a view component, and every tab page is also a separate view component. Okay, so are you saying your tabs are kind of like router links, and as you specify them, they need to change a value and ultimately display a different page in that section of pages? All right, thanks, Pop Logics. Yeah, I'm not as familiar with Twitch chat quite yet. Thank you. Yeah, but Paula Bean, that should be pretty straightforward, right? So what, you could hop over to CodePen. I'm not sure if they have starter templates anymore. Right, they don't have to be router links, and there's actually quite a few different ways to accomplish it, depending on if you want to have multiple page components, multiple tab page components, or whether or not you want to use something kind of like a single one, but the content of it just changes every time you move around. But cool. Yeah, no, Vue's pretty sweet, and that should be a pretty good use case for it. Let's see. If you have anything you're working on, feel free to share links to it, or if there's anything you want to talk about, just let me know. If not, let's check in on our install here, and then let's open up Figma. Whew. Cypress, so slow. So what, you need to emit an event from a tab page, and then you would use that to navigate to a different tab page? Is that what you're hinting at, or do you just mean just any kind of action in general, and it should kind of have side effects on a different tab page? So we're using Figma to play with this SVG. It's kind of it's a web app first, so I'm pretty sure this is running in like an Electron shell. But you can also download it as like a desktop app. Yeah, and an emitted event. Good. And just kind of lets us do some stuff that we would normally do in like Sketch, but we just don't have Sketch. So that's our whole frame. Frame, layer. Let's unlock it. Okay, let's shove that there. Let's see if we can actually shrink our frame a little bit. It's Figma. Let me grab you a link for it. So I don't know if you've ever heard of Sketch. It's kind of the new hotness if you have a Mac for designing files. It's pretty cheap. I think it's like $39 a license, but unfortunately it doesn't work for Windows. And you can see, interestingly, so I have these two open right now, and it's almost like they're in collab mode, right? So like what I do on my web browser affects what's happening in my desktop app. It really is just kind of like a Photoshop or Adobe Illustrator equivalent, but I like to think of it as more of like a Sketch competitor, and more like the Windows version of Sketch. Yeah, so if you're using Vue, you should just be able to use the Vue CLI starter to spin up a new project, and for the most part, you just pass props down to children from parent components, and you emit events from child components if you want to have actions that can kind of speak to either adjacent children or update like a global store, and then you can tie any of them to that global store if you want them to share data. Yeah, no. jQuery is pretty rough for DOM manipulation. You're going to have a much better time using a modern framework like Vue. Not that there's anything wrong with jQuery, and it's good for quick prototypes, but I'd really recommend moving to Vue, if nothing else, just to build some experience in it. Alright, so let's see here. We're just shrinking up our canvas. And so I'm not very experienced with Figma, so if you don't see me doing any quick shortcuts or anything like that, it's not my wheelhouse. I'm using it just enough to kind of play with some SVG stuff. Alright, so we've shrunk it up there. We might want to change our letter spacing to be a little bit closer. I'm just not sure what that crowding looks like. Because, I mean, this is going to have to be on the top bar, and if it's too sprawling, I mean, it's a fairly long name. I'll leave it as is for now. We'll see how that goes. So let's go ahead and save this. Auto-saved. And then we're going to File, Exports. So I think you need to set it as an exportable object is how it works. Yeah, so there's export down here. So I think we have the ability to export the whole frame as an SVG, and we'll overwrite the current logo file that we're using. And then we'll ultimately delete that white background, which is just a white rectangle, when it gets converted to SVG. So we're going to go to our data folder, we're going to go to code, we're going to find the project, and then let's see, source, assets. There we go. So we should be able to pull that up pretty easily. Clip path. So we can get rid of that white background. And we should be able to grab this whole SVG and replace it with what we have sitting in logo text. That should do the trick. That's all we're really using this file for, is kind of like a little SVG container. So that way we can pull it in and have inline SVGs instead of having to do an image link, which image source, which gives us less flexibility if we want to specify like a fill or if we want to animate this for any reason. I don't know if this needs to be a group, given that it's one path. I don't know if we need to have it be deft either, or this, or this, or this. Let's just make sure this still opens up. Copy. Let's override. Let's remove this template. Should have a preview here. Hey, LDUBZ98, what's up? How you doing? Reveal and explore. Let's pop this open. Yeah. So that's closer to what we were going for, and it seems to render just fine. So we'll be able to use that as an inline SVG. Right now I'm just building like a little streaming website that'll have a logo here, name here, here's our live stream, some page transitions that'll have an about page. We're going to be leveraging some of the stuff that you can find at pagetransitions.com by Sarah Drasner, or when you move from place to place, you kind of get more seamless native app feeling like transitions. And then if you want to influence what we're working on next, we have a repository here where you can submit project ideas. We've already talked a little bit about HTML5 Canvas, Twitter, Twitch channel API, and C# WebSockets. But if there's anything in particular you want to see us work on, since I'm here every day at lunch, create an issue and maybe it'll be something that I chip away at. Alright, so back to this. Let's see here. So our big thing is I think we're still waiting on Cypress is just killing us. There we go. Yeah, so this is using Vue. Right now you can kind of see our different components and how they fit together. We're using the Vue CLI starter, the 3.0, to kind of scaffold this project out. And so that's what we're playing with, and we're following just some guidance from either Chris Fritz, who kind of works on the Vue documentation and the enterprise boilerplate for larger projects. He just has some really good ideas in there, and some of the transition ideas that are kind of put forth by Sarah Drasner, and they're both on the Vue core team. Let's see here. When we pull data in, so again, this is using the Twitch API a little bit, we're probably going to look at either Firebase or maybe some functions as a service, and maybe the YouTube API, depending on where we store stuff at. I think because of the number of viewers and followers I have, I only get archiving of videos for something like 14 days. So anything longer than that, and we're going to have some issues if we want to show video series on here long term. So I have been recording the sessions and ultimately using that as kind of like an archive on YouTube. So we'll probably pull those in here and have related series that are stacks that you can kind of go into and kind of iterate over. And we might do quick clips where if we've talked about anything that's particularly useful during a live stream, we might cut those up into chunks and use those as like little knowledge bombs that you can grab that are a little bit more focused than just a video archive. And then we'll probably eventually write some Medium posts about our experience live streaming, and also... Oh, cool. That's good to know. Yeah, so we're using the Slobs client here, and so we do record on this, and I've been uploading those. I think they're like .flv video files to YouTube. I think I only have one right now, but I don't link to it anywhere. I've been trying to put helpful resources in the channel info beneath this. Yeah, so I think I only have one video, and I think it was our stream from yesterday. Alright, so now it looks like we can finally do this. Run, serve. That's what I get for deleting my node modules. There's just a lot of files in there. Cypress especially, it has a huge install time if you have a slow connection. Really powerful, but you're downloading a full desktop application to use to test those end-to-end tests. So these are just warnings that are thrown by the linter. They're like code suggestions to make sure that you're doing things consistently. There's a way to automatically fix most of them, but again, they're just warnings for right now, so they're not going to prevent our build. So I should be able to update this. I should be able to look at that CDD logo text again. It's a little bit better, but we're going to want to scale that. So let's see here. Yeah, do you ever just lose where things are at? There we go. Yeah, so our biggest thing is that we want this to be appropriately sized, and we want to change the fill color. So there we go. Let's see what happens when I do fill white. So it doesn't like that on the containing, but if we can do that on the path, that'll change it right there. So you see we have the ability to kind of change text, not using color like you would normally expect for a font, but you use fill because you're changing that SVG property. Same for width and height. I think viewbox we want to keep the same. I think width and height we can scale down, and the viewbox should scale appropriately. So I think height is our biggest limiter here, and that's kind of going to set our size. I don't know if we need to specify both of these. So let's pull this off. Let's do width of 25. Alright, so that looks closer to what, or height of 25. That looks closer to what we're trying to get. And you kind of use this as like an approximate font size. So we'll do that, and then since that's the top level item, if we specify that on the actual thing, it should apply as well. So we should be able to go here and specify 35. Yep. And next we're going to want to change the fill, and since it's on that path data, there's probably a better way to do this, but I'm just going to cheat and use a prop. So we'll do script. I wonder if Sarah Drasner has a shortcut for this. No, she just uses VBase. Alright, script. name, logo text, and then we could do vprops using that little VS Code snippet that Sarah Drasner has published. And we can go ahead and call this fill type. It's going to be a string. We can give it a default. We'll give it a default hex value of white. More often than not, that's what we're going to be using. So that way, if it's not applied, it'll just kind of be the color that occurs most often. So let's see here. So it looks like D's all the path data, fill's right there. So we'll make this bindable fill, and we'll use our fill from props. So it'll default to white. And let's go ahead and fix the formatting here. Alright. So the rest of this, anything top level, you can just kind of apply to that SVG element. So we might do style. We'll do 12 pixels. See what that looks like. How is he positioned? What container is he in? Alright. So we might want to position him with flex in the center, but I'm just going to use margin right now. Since we know his height's 35, we'll just do a margin top. And these are all things you can come back and clean later. I like to just kind of get things approximate first, and then I circle back and I do some of the, probably the closer to best practices. So there we go. So that looks a lot better than the default font that we did have, which is just using that OpenStack font, so that way we have faster loading, non-blocking times. And now we just need that logo there, right? So let's go ahead and hyperlink that whole brand. We'll go ahead and use router link. Which really just kind of throws a anchor tag around it. So let's go about us. So now we get that seamless transition back via clicking. Alright, I think follow us still throws us to Twitch, our specific channel right now. I'm not sure what font we want to adopt for this quite yet. But let's go ahead and look into, yeah, see, we'll throw that up. Let's go ahead and start, oh, what's happening here? There we go. Alright, we're fine. Let's start playing with these cards a little bit and play with the responsiveness of this, so that way as things get smaller we don't have this overlapping, they kind of start to stack. So that way our logo text disappears when we hit a certain resolution. And so this card, kind of, the concept of it disappears at that mobile breakpoint where it doesn't make sense to have that much padding on the sides anymore because it's taking up too much screen real estate. Like if you open up an app and you have this much padding, where it's almost half of your width, you kind of want that gone so that way you have more real estate for the data that you came to the website for. Alright. So I think in general we're going to want to do this with cards, kind of make them disappear. Again, there's probably a better way to do it, given that there's more than one ways to kind of reuse this card layout. But for at least right now, we can just kind of override its styling when we drop beneath those breakpoints that we've kind of set in our configuration file already. Alright. So let's take a peek at... So I think we were kind of basing our layout loosely on... Oh man, what was its name? We'll just go to where we found it. So there's pages.xyz, which again has, in general, just really well UX'd layouts and examples. So I think we were pulling this from product pages. We were looking at tiny cards. You can see how it's fairly similar. We'll throw this up. And we'll open it incognito because it remembers who I am. It's giving me a different layout because of that. And so you can kind of see where we're stealing our inspiration from, right? I do like that bold text up front. Maybe we need to use a heavier weight here. So again, you'll see here that they're already doing this with this main card layout, where once you get to, it's probably that 1008. Yeah, so once you hit 1008, they get rid of that whole idea of a card, and they just kind of give you that white background. Yeah, it looks like they still keep the padding bottom on everything that's up near the top bar there. They still have that padding bottom, but then they just have the card kind of expand out. It loses the border radius, and the row that's around it just kind of goes to 100% width. So let's play with that. So you can see in, I think top bar we're using some of those styles already, or maybe just in row. So we have these media queries where at the medium breakpoint, we're changing how things kind of work. And so that's what we're going to do here. We're already pulling in our global variables, so it's going to know what medium is. So when we hit that max width, we'll be able to modify the card stylings, and they'll override the same stylings that have the similar specificity because they come after it, and they're only applied when we reach that mobile breakpoint. And so what we're going to do here is say when this happens, we want to change our width to, yeah, we might want to use that same logic. So let's go ahead and check that out. Inspect. Let's make sure we don't have those errors anymore. Sometimes they linger from a previous in-progress design. All right. So we're beneath 1008. That's fine. Let's inspect this. So this is our card. We're looking at the media query. It's setting that width of 912. So we actually want, I think, just 100%. And we want to remove margin. Looks like that's not what's boxing us in. So what's positioning that card? The row. Okay, so we need an override for this row that removes, I guess we could use negative margin. So let's try that out. So we have margin top right now. So we'll do margin left. Is it negative 30 pixels probably? Margin right, negative 30 pixels. Alright, so at least pulled it left. The width is still a little bit off. And again, this probably isn't the best way to do this, but we can cheat and do calc. And I'll stretch it out to the sides there. Select text from the wife. Whoop. Pull it up. We have a newborn who's not sleeping, so she's a little frustrated. Alright. So you can see we have card there. So we're going to want to nuke probably the box radius, or the border radius and the box shadow as well. So we're kind of removing the whole concept of the card at that medium breakpoint. I'm not sure if I could just say none, but let's try it. And then let's go ahead and do... I'm not sure if it's none or if it's 0. Let's see what it thinks about that. No, border radius, 0. So you can see then, here we are, we're at card. We get small enough, we lose the concept of a card. So that's interesting. So we'll just need to make sure that we'll maybe look at, instead of encapsulating this in a row, have it kind of handle its own positioning or something else. So let's take a peek at that. So I think this is happening in our home route, our home view. We were using a row to kind of accomplish this. So maybe we just need a modified version of that row. Let's see here. So what's the big difference is that we just have a different breakpoint style, right? So if we look at our row, our breakpoint medium, instead of snapping to 100%, That's just giving us that fixed width. But we're saying that even though we want that for our top and for our nav, that we don't want it for kind of this containing element. We want it for the content inside of the containing element, but we don't necessarily want it for the containing element itself. So if we look at home, instead of putting a row around this, we might just put a row around the content at the right breakpoint. So let's play with, again, their site to kind of see how they tackle this problem. See right here, it's very similar to the header. There's the medium. There's 1008, so they all snap. So I think I actually got my breakpoints mixed up, and that could be why we're having issues. So this is 1008, I think, is the small breakpoint, and we can verify that real quick. Let's look at global. Yeah, so at 1008 is when we snap to 100%, and then we'll see that there as well. So we were snapping a little bit early, and that's why it looks like we have that disjointed thing going on, and we're trying to kind of mush two different layouts together. So that's my bad. That's just my mistake. So we'll go back to card. We're using small. Let's get rid of these margins. Box shadow none. Width should be fine at 100%. Let's see here. Okay, so we don't necessarily want our rows to have that padding when they're at their smallest width. We probably just want our content to have that. So we can change that. So that pushes everything out, but that just means the content needs to be in charge of its own padding. So if we hop back up to this section right here, which is I think the most glaringly obvious that it doesn't have it. So you'll see that we have our blue container, and we can probably just give that. So we have blue, we have container, we have our row, and then we have this. And so we'll just go ahead and wrap some padding around this. Let's call it and again, probably a better way to do this, and we'll play with that. Alright, I got my nesting wrong. Router link, nav. CDV row. Sure, let's just do it there for now. And we'll add a class. So that messes up our flexbox too. So we might be able to just put it on that specific row, I guess. Let's play around. So we do have 7 viewers right now. Again, with this thing constantly refreshing, I'm not sure if that throws off the viewer count for Twitch. But feel free to just chime in with any questions you have, or if there's anything in particular that you want to see. I work from home, so I'm half here just for the social stuff. It's nice when PopLogic consistently drops in and chimes in with questions, and it's good to see new people like Paula Bean and L Dubs popping in. So thanks again for just checking out the channel. Oh, and Paula Bean, thanks for following. Yeah, 3 minutes ago. Appreciate it. Let's see here. It helps me justify buying things like a microphone, or I think I have a green screen coming in the mail. All right. Let's see here. Transition's still good. This is looking better. Let's see what happens when we pull it out. So let's look at our 2 breakpoints. This is our large. Anything above... yeah, anything above 1208. Let's look at anything beneath that. So that's going to be our first snap. Yeah, it can be hard to find a good one. I'm not sure if saying that you unfollow a lot of people is a threat or not, but thanks for the follow anyway. Hopefully I can keep you around. Oh man, do they have voice modifiers, or are you Barry White by default? Yeah, it's a Blue Yeti. It's just their black edition. I think the C# Fritz, who's a really popular streamer in the programming channel, uses a Roadster, which I think is similar price range. Let's see here. So that automatically does it, and then when we drop to, we're at 1,000. So we just need to make sure on mobile that we're accounting for our own padding. But I'm okay with that for right now. So let's play with this section. Hey, I mean, Michael Jackson did all right for himself, so by all means. All right. So these are going to be video series. So let's go ahead and span these out and see if we can do some stuff to kind of handle their animations as they kind of go beyond the container's width. Card deck. Home route. So I think we're just pulling it as a single card deck, right? We've talked a little bit about doing. This is just we're gonna do a templated for each. Templates can be nice because you can do some control logic that might be harder without virtual elements. I mean, that makes sense, cleaning up your streams, especially if you get notifications for all of them, right? It can be pretty annoying. I know I only follow a couple of people, but I'll still get 5 or 6 notifications a day saying, hey, hop online, they're streaming this particular content. I think it's really important wherever you consume your media to kind of constantly prune that. I mean, so the template element is a native HTML5 element. We're just using it as like a control element for our v4. So I can see a v4 x comma I in an array 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and it allows me to kind of like wrap a template and then iterate over it. But I'm sure that Angular has a similar concept, or they accomplish it in a similar way. So like in old Knockout, if you used to use that, you'd use comments, and you could write your control logic inside of those comments if you didn't want to have like a containing element. But you accomplish it in Vue with just the template element. So X is the object, and I is the index, and we just need to have a unique key on everything you're iterating over, or the for loop can get a little bit mad at you. So what's the issue here? So it wants the key on the card deck, and that's why it's mad at us, because the template itself won't actually be rendered. Alright, what's the next issue? Probably not closing something. There we go. And so you see here, this is where we're getting our multiples. So it's stacked, and we want it horizontal. Yeah, nah, if you don't, you kind of get overwhelmed. I don't know how long it took me to slowly unsubscribe from everything that like LinkedIn does, or even just YouTube. It's crazy how much of their attention, of your attention, a lot of apps want right off the bat. Yeah, I'm still not a huge fan of Angular. I don't think it's quite as easy to parse, and same with React. Again, I think they're both really powerful, and they're both great frameworks. But part of the reason I like Vue is because I think it's easier for new developers to just kind of pick up. Oh, a second, just checking my messages from my wife again. There we go. Oh yeah, sometimes you have that documentation lag, right? When they publish out a new version, it can sometimes take a couple of months for it to catch up. You see that a lot with frameworks that release really fast. In fact, it's been a gripe for Webpack. But then usually the counter argument is, well, if you see something wrong with the documentation, submit a fix for it. So we might create eventually something called like a card deck container that we can reuse for these card decks. But we'll just kind of prototype it out here in line. So it's yelling at me again. Failed to compile. Usually it's just a mismatch in tags. So let's see. Error compiling template. No matching div tag. Because I started a new one, I didn't close it. There we go. So now we can look at our card deck container, and we can start to give it some of those flex properties that will make this a little bit easier to position these. So we can do display flex. Yep, they're already in a row. And then we can do, what is it? Justify content space around, or space between. By content. So in a perfect world, that makes them just fit their containers. Let's see here. Yeah, nah, and I mean, so it is, Angular is available on GitHub. If you're having issues with specific documentation, you could create a pull request for that issue. I know a lot of places really appreciate stuff like that, because it'll give people that are looking for low-hanging issues to kind of contribute and say, hey, I contributed to Angular. Even if all they did was really kind of help build out that documentation to help people like you that are getting started. It really is a good low-hanging fruit issue to create and to notify the team of, even though they may already be aware. Let's see here. Sorry, I'm checking my phone while live streaming. All right, so we're display flex. Let's look at the Flexbox guide real quick. This is kind of the go-to resource for Flexbox. Pretty much no matter how you search it, this is where you're going to end up. So we're looking for space around, and we can use that here. So let's make sure that display flex is our container. Let's give it a width of 100%. All right. Yeah, no, it is a really good guide. But I'll try to habitually post links to resources I'm using for anyone that is following along. So these are all of our flex items. Let's just go ahead and do flex grow 1 and see what happens. Let's take a peek here. So it looks like the issue might be that we're not expanding to the edge of our container. Let's see why. So this section, is that our card slot maybe? Let's see. So we have our row, we have our card, we have our card slot. So that should always just kind of expand, right? Class card. Let's see, width. So our card doesn't need that width. It's kind of wrapped in a row. So it'll always be as big as it needs to be, assuming that the containing element is actually setting that. So let's just do width 100%. Let's see if that's applied or not. Card content, section. That's what's being injected in. Let's go back to home. This guy. So I don't know if we need... Okay, so we're using him for padding for that content. So we're using grow, which is going to make these grow to the size of their container, and we're using space around, or space between. So instead of space around would kind of have automatic padding on all sides. Space between is just the padding between. We're making sure that it's a flex row that is this full size. And it fits fairly well. So the question though becomes, what happens when we put more elements than this can contain in there, right? So that might be when we need to start specifying an overflow and not allowing our flex box to kind of move outside of that. And then we kind of come up with a fancy way to scroll that container. So we'll go ahead and do... let's just create a few more card elements in there to see what that looks like. And let's go ahead and just duplicate that for this. So that way we have similar looking displays. Quick clips, and then let's do, I think 35 pixels good for separating. I like 15 for like still an association. So it'll specify it enough, but you'll know they're still related. It's still not very large. Let's do 55, 15. There we go. Quick clips, video series. You'll actually see a fair amount of people using inline styles for margin and padding. Especially on like containing elements, just because it's sometimes a little cumbersome to have those incorporated in every single class you create. It might look a little bit cleaner, but a lot of times that's not how you're positioning things. If you're getting really fancy, you can do things called like modular forts or vertical rhythm to make sure that in general all that stuff is consistent and on the same scale throughout your website, and certain amounts could be used to more consistently show that things are or are not related. But that's something that is a little bit beyond me at this point. I'm just have awareness of it. So you can look up, what is it called? Not modular force. If it comes to the top of my tongue, I'll post a link for it. Let's see here though. So that's 1 through 4. Let's make it expand outside of this. Okay, so the last thing we want is for our page to have this horizontal scrolling. It is by far my least favorite thing to see. So we just need to set like a no overflow on this container, I think. So our width is already 100%, but we'll do overflow hidden. So we're good there, but now it's clipping that. So we want some way to kind of scroll, right? So maybe we'll say we might be able to translate the contents. So that's the container. We might need a separate layer inside of it that we can actually transition as we move stuff. I'm going to take a peek again at how it's kind of accomplished here to give us an idea of how to approach it. So they have an SVG polyline. They have their container as a flex basis. It has a little bit of padding, scroll behavior smooth. They have their items in it, and you can see they have items that are loaded outside of the container, but they're not visible because overflow X is auto, overflow Y is hidden. Let's see here. So maybe this is where they're actually doing the overflow hidden for the contents of this. All right. So really we're just trying to find out where exactly they're hiding that content at. Okay, not there. Not there. Not here. I feel like each of these aren't responsible for themselves, but let's check. Alright, let's play with that then. So it looks like they have a container for everything, and we'll kind of duplicate that. Alright, so this is our section inside of the card. It's all of our card's contents. So eventually this is just going to go to the edge. So I think we can drop this for now. But each of these are going to be wrapped in their own section, where we're eventually going to have a control on the left and a control on the right. So we're going to have like we'll just stub some stuff. Navigate left. Navigate right. So this is also display flex. We're going to have flex direction row. We'll eventually drop these, so we can just drop them for now. That's fine. And so this is just the content of the contents of the card, and we're kind of building out what's going to look like a row item, essentially. So we'll pop to-dos underneath these. And until then, our padding on either side is going to look a little bit off. So inside of that, it has this element, which is their left arrow. And then it has this, which is their container for all of these items. So they have different flex bases. We're playing with mobile, so let's just go ahead and go straight to that right now. So I think the whole idea here is that if you were on mobile, you could... Oh, that's not my touch screen. If we're on my laptop, I could scroll and do that with the touch screen there. So we have a set flex basis, display flex, as direction, grow, shrink, overflow. And I think a lot of this is just to kind of make it fill the entire container. So we're just really going to play with these properties right here, these bottom four. Just a heads up, I only have a couple more minutes, so if there's anything in particular you want to see or anything you want to queue up for next time, remember we have our repository for submitting ideas that you'd like us to work on. This is probably what I'll touch on after our website gets wrapped up. And again, I do work on this a little bit off hours, so you won't... Sometimes the progress will jump a little bit. I think it'd be a little boring if you saw me kind of twiddle with everything. But you can submit project ideas, and anything we do work on is going to be in this organization's collection of repositories. So you'll be able to find the code there. And again, when we push to this, it publishes to our website. So anything that we commit, you'll ultimately be able to see on coffeedrivendev.com or cdd.coffee. All right, So let's open this back up. Really only have me for about 3 more minutes. Let's see here. So then we're going to have another container around this. That's our card deck container. And I think that flex basis may be what helps that from exploding. Yeah, that's interesting. So we'll do that, and then we'll move this out. There we go. See, it still goes on forever. So I imagine flex basis is what's setting that container size to make sure that we don't lose, since we're not using any overflow properties for X. So flex basis just becomes auto. That's interesting. So we'll use that on our, we'll set a mobile breakpoint and see if we can get a similar effect on ours then. So what is it? Media. Max width small. We're going to target that container. Let's see. Undefined small. So we're not importing our variables in this file yet, and so that's why it's yelling at us. So we'll hop back over to row or to home. Make sure we have that variable available. There we go. So that didn't quite do it either, and then we're definitely on that small layout resolution. So we're going to need to look into making sure that we do limit that. And we'll just do that next time, because I need to go. But yeah, so the idea here is that we want that overflow hidden. And then at this resolution, you'll probably just use your finger. You're able to scroll through the video series, or we'll probably have larger tap buttons on either side. At this resolution, very similar. We're going to have the arrows that are kind of there to scroll through. Yeah, thanks, PopLogix. It's really nice to talk to you every day. Again, I work from home, and it's just great to catch up. And then at this resolution, it's going to kind of more closely mimic what they had. And you'll see right here that it's automatically doing that. Again, that space between. And then probably tomorrow we'll also get a little bit to the About page transitions, where we'll be able to navigate between the different contributors to the live stream. Who I think will start contributing starting next week as soon as their equipment comes in. All right. Thanks, and have a good day.